The Strange Case of the Kentucky Meat Shower, 1876. Imagine stepping outside your quiet farmhouse on an ordinary Friday afternoon and hearing something unusual hit the ground. Not rain, not hail, not snow, but meat. Real meat. Chunks of flesh falling silently from a clear blue sky. No clouds, no storm, no warning. This is not a horror movie opening. This happened in real life in the United States of America in 1876. And to this day, it remains one of the strangest documented events in American history. It became known as the Kentucky Meat Shower. And the truth behind it is far more unsettling than the mystery itself. A quiet afternoon in rural Kentucky. March 3rd, 1876. Bath County, Kentucky. At the time, this part of the country was deeply rural. Rolling hills, scattered farms, dirt roads, and families who lived close to the land. News traveled slowly. Most people relied on newspapers that arrived days late, if at all. One of those families was headed by Allen Crouch, a farmer living just outside the small community near Olympia Springs. That afternoon, Allen's wife was outside tending to household chores. The day was calm, no wind, no strange sounds, just the quiet rhythm of rural life. Then, without warning, pieces of something began falling from the sky. At first, she thought it was snow, but it wasn't cold, and the objects were too large. Then she thought it might be hail, but hail doesn't splatter. When the pieces hit the ground, they didn't bounce. They landed with a soft, wet thud. She froze, because what lay scattered across the yard was unmistakable. It was meat. Flesh from the sky. Within minutes, the ground around the farmhouse was covered. The pieces varied in size. Some were small strips. Others were thick chunks, several inches long. They were pinkish red, raw and fresh-looking. This was no isolated drop. Witnesses later estimated the meat shower over an area roughly 100 yards long and 50 yards wide. And the most disturbing part? The sky was completely clear. No birds overhead, no storm clouds, no aircraft, though airplanes would not exist for decades. Just meat, falling from nowhere. Panic, prayer, and confusion. Allen Crouch rushed outside when he heard his wife screaming. Neighbors soon arrived, drawn by the commotion. People stood in disbelief, staring at the ground. Some crossed themselves, others whispered prayers. A few backed away in fear. In 1876, America was still deeply religious, especially in rural Kentucky. Many believed events like this were signs from God. Some said it was a blessing. Others said it was a warning. A few said it was punishment. But no one could explain how meat could fall from a clear sky. The first reactions. Word spread quickly through the community. People came from nearby farms to see it with their own eyes. They bent down, touched it, picked it up. The meat had no feathers, no bones attached, no skin, just flesh. Several witnesses later said it smelled normal, like fresh butchered meat.
And then came the moment that still shocks historians today. A few men decided to taste it. They cooked small portions over a fire. Some said it tasted like venison. Others said it was mutton. One reportedly said it tasted like bear. This detail may sound unbelievable, but it was recorded in contemporary reports. People in rural America were used to hunting and preparing wild meat. Curiosity overcame fear. Still, no one could agree on what animal it came from. News reaches the outside world. Within days, newspapers across Kentucky began reporting the event. Then it spread beyond the state. National newspapers picked up the story, and soon readers across America were confronted with an impossible headline: "Meat falls from the sky in Kentucky." Some papers treated it seriously, others mocked it. A few suggested it was a hoax. But too many witnesses had seen it, too many pieces of meat had been collected, and the story refused to die. Scientists get involved. Eventually, samples of the meat were sent to scientists for examination. This was the late 19th century. Modern forensic science did not exist. DNA analysis was unheard of, but doctors and biologists still attempted to identify the tissue under microscopes. One scientist claimed the meat was lung tissue. Another said it was muscle. One suggested it was cartilage. A report published in the Journal of the American Medical Association mentioned the event, lending it credibility. The conclusions were frustratingly vague. They could not definitively identify the species, but they were confident about one thing: it was real animal flesh. Theories began to emerge. As news spread, explanations poured in. Some believed it was a freak weather phenomenon. Others suggested it was carried by a whirlwind. A few insisted it was divine intervention. Then came one of the most controversial ideas. What if it wasn't falling from the sky at all? What if it came from above, but not from heaven? The vulture theory. One naturalist proposed a theory that would later become the most accepted explanation. In North America, there is a bird known as the turkey vulture. These birds feed on carrion, dead animals, rotting flesh, and they have a strange defensive behavior. When threatened, or when they need to become lighter to escape danger, vultures will vomit. Not once, but sometimes all at once, especially when flying in groups. If a flock of vultures had been feeding nearby, taken flight together, and regurgitated mid-air, it could theoretically create a rain of meat. It sounded disgusting, but plausible. Still, there was a problem. Witnesses reported no birds in the sky, and the amount of meat seemed excessive for regurgitation. The debate continued. A nation fascinated. The Kentucky meat shower became a topic of conversation across America. It appeared in newspapers, journals, and letters. Mark Twain himself referenced strange phenomena like it in his writings, fascinated by the absurdity of reality. The event joined a growing list of unexplained occurrences in American history, and yet, after the headlines faded, the mystery remained unresolved. The meat eventually rotted, animals scavenged what was left, life moved on, but the question lingered. What really happened that day in Kentucky? And could it ever happen again? The deeper implications. The meat shower wasn't just a curiosity, it exposed something deeper about human nature. When faced with the impossible, people don't just look for answers, they look for meaning. Religion, science, fear, humor, all collided in a muddy Kentucky field in 1876, and more than a century later, we are still talking about it.
As the days passed after the meat stopped falling, Bath County did not return to normal. The ground still bore the marks of the event. Stains darkened the grass. The smell lingered as the flesh began to decay. Dogs and wild animals circled the area, drawn by the scent. Farmers avoided the field where it had happened, not because of fear alone, but because no one quite knew how to explain what they had witnessed. People kept talking, and the more they talked, the stranger the story became. Eyewitnesses under scrutiny. Journalists soon arrived from Louisville, Cincinnati, and beyond. They questioned everyone who had been present that afternoon. Alan Crouch, his wife, neighbors, travelers who had passed nearby. What made the case so compelling was not just the event itself, but the consistency of the accounts. Witnesses agreed on several key points. The sky had been clear. There had been no storm. The meat had fallen quietly, not violently. The pieces were scattered, not piled in one place. No one described feathers, wings, or birds overhead at the moment it happened. That last detail troubled scientists the most. If birds were responsible, where were they? Newspapers pushed back. Not every editor believed the story. Some newspapers openly accused the Kentucky locals of exaggeration. A few suggested it was an elaborate prank. Others hinted at mass hysteria, claiming people had mistaken something else for meat. But those theories fell apart when physical samples entered the conversation. This was not imagination. You could hold it in your hands. The meat under the microscope. Several samples were preserved in alcohol and sent to medical professionals. One of the most cited examinations came from Dr. Allen McLean Hamilton, a respected neurologist of the era. Under a microscope, he observed muscle fibers and connective tissue. His conclusion was cautious but clear. This was animal tissue, not fungus, not algae, not manufactured material. Another doctor proposed that the tissue resembled lung tissue, which raised new questions. Why lung? Why not muscle meat or organs commonly eaten by scavengers? The mystery deepened. Alternative theories multiplied. As scientific certainty wavered, alternative explanations rushed in. One idea suggested the meat had come from a slaughterhouse explosion, but the nearest facilities were miles away, and no such incident had been reported. Another theory involved a meteorological phenomenon. Some speculated that a strong updraft had lifted decaying animal remains into the sky, only to drop them later. This idea failed under scrutiny. The weather records showed no unusual winds that day. A more imaginative explanation claimed the meat came from a passing balloon. Balloons were rare but not unheard of in the 1870s. Still, there was no record of any balloon flight in the area, and no reason a balloon would carry raw meat. Every theory explained one detail and failed another. Religion enters the debate. In rural Kentucky, science was not the only lens through which people understood the world. Some ministers preached sermons about the event. One described it as a test of faith. Another suggested it was a reminder of God's power over nature. A few even compared it to biblical stories of manna falling from the sky. But manna nourished. This terrified. The religious explanations comforted some and alarmed others. Families argued. Church attendance briefly rose, then returned to normal as weeks passed. Still, no official religious explanation was ever agreed upon. The smell of decay and the passage of time. By the second week, the meat had begun to rot badly. Flies swarmed, buzzards circled nearby fields, though notably not in large numbers over the original site. Farmers burned portions of it, others buried it. Nature reclaimed the evidence, and with that, the physical mystery slowly disappeared. But the story did not. The event enters scientific history. Years later, the Kentucky meat shower was included in compilations of unexplained phenomena. It appeared in books on odd weather, anomalous events, and early American mysteries. Unlike many strange tales, this one had documentation. Dates, names, locations, medical journals. It was not folklore passed down orally, it was recorded history. That is why it continues to bother researchers, revisiting the vulture explanation. Decades after the event, ornithologists revisited the vulture theory with more data. Turkey vultures are known to feed in large groups. They can carry significant amounts of partially digested meat, and under stress, they can regurgitate mid-flight. In theory, if a flock had been startled simultaneously, the result could resemble a localized shower of flesh. But even modern experts admit something feels off. Why was no one certain they saw birds? Why were the tissue types inconsistent? Why was the distribution pattern seem so even? The vulture explanation remains the best guess, but it is still a guess, a cultural footnote that refuses to die. The Kentucky meat shower has been referenced in academic papers, television documentaries, podcasts, and late-night comedy. It sits at a strange crossroads between science and the absurd. Too well documented to dismiss, too strange to fully explain. It challenges a comforting assumption we all carry, that the sky only gives us what we expect, why it still matters. The real power of the Kentucky meat shower is not in the meat itself, it's in what happens when reality breaks pattern. For one afternoon in 1876, the natural order failed to behave normally.
And humans did what they always do when faced with the unexplainable. They argued, they speculated, they tried to impose meaning. And when no perfect answer came, they told the story again and again. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the Kentucky meat shower refused to fade into obscurity. Most strange events slowly dissolve into folklore, distorted by retelling. This one did the opposite. The more time passed, the more carefully it was studied. And with each new examination, the case became more unsettling, re-examining the evidence with modern eyes. By the early 1900s, science advanced. Biology became more systematic, meteorology more precise. Historians began to revisit unusual reports from the past, separating exaggeration from fact. The Kentucky incident stood out. Why? Because it had physical evidence, because it had named witnesses, because it had medical documentation.
Modern scholars reviewing the original reports noticed something important. No one ever claimed it was supernatural at the time. The people who saw it were confused, frightened, but grounded. They did not describe visions or miracles. They described raw meat falling from the sky. That distinction matters. The question of quantity. One of the biggest challenges to the vulture theory was volume. Turkey vultures can regurgitate food, but only so much. Witnesses described enough meat to cover a large area. Some estimates suggested several pounds, possibly more. For a single bird, impossible. For an entire flock, perhaps. But this would require an unusually large group feeding heavily just before flight and reacting simultaneously to the same trigger. Rare, but not impossible. And that uncomfortable gap between rare and impossible is where this mystery lives. Why no one saw the birds? Critics of the vulture explanation often point to one detail. No birds were seen, or so it was reported. But memory is unreliable, especially during moments of shock. When something utterly unexpected happens, the human brain focuses on the anomaly, not the background. People remembered the meat. They may not have registered birds at high altitude, especially if the flock had already passed when the meat began falling. This does not prove the theory, but it weakens one of the strongest objections. What about the meat itself? The tissue type remains one of the strangest elements. Some samples were described as muscle, others as lung. One report suggested cartilage. This inconsistency has two possible explanations. First, the examinations were done by different doctors using limited tools. Microscopy in the 1870s was basic. Second, vultures do not eat selectively. They tear into carcasses and consume whatever is available. If multiple tissue types fell, that would actually support the scavenger theory. Yet the uncertainty remains. Could it happen again? In theory, yes. In practice, almost certainly not. Modern agriculture, urban development, and changes in bird behavior make such an event extremely unlikely today. But rare does not mean impossible. There are documented cases of fish falling from the sky, frogs, even snakes. Nature occasionally produces events so strange that they feel staged. The Kentucky meat shower may be one of those moments when several rare factors aligned perfectly. Public fascination in the modern era. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, the story found new life. It appeared in television shows about unexplained phenomena. It became a favorite topic for science educators discussing critical thinking. It was cited in books about anomalous weather, and online it exploded. The internet loves stories that blur the line between fact and disbelief. But unlike many viral mysteries, this one has receipts. What makes this case different? Most bizarre historical stories fail under scrutiny. This one survives, not because it has a clean explanation, but because it doesn't. It sits in a narrow space where science can propose but not conclude. That makes people uncomfortable. We prefer answers, the human element. Imagine being there, not as a reader, not as a skeptic, but as someone standing in that field in 1876. You look up, the sky is blue, and meat is falling around you. No theory would feel satisfying in that moment. And that is why this story endures. It reminds us that the world is not obligated to make sense to us at all times, from local oddity to national legend. The Kentucky meat shower began as a local curiosity. It became a national headline, then a scientific footnote, and finally a cultural legend grounded in fact. Few events travel that path. Fewer still do so without collapsing under scrutiny. Final question. Was it vultures? Probably. Was it something else? Possibly. Do we know for certain? No. And that uncertainty is the most honest part of the story. More than a century has passed since that quiet afternoon in Bath County, Kentucky. The farmhouse is long gone. The field has changed. Generations have come and gone without ever seeing anything like it again. And yet, the question still hangs in the air. What really fell from the sky that day when mystery refuses to die? Most historical mysteries fade because they lack evidence. This one survives because it has too much. Named witnesses, newspaper records, scientific examination, medical journals. The Kentucky meat shower did not rely on rumor. It relied on observation. That is what makes it unsettling. If something this strange can happen once, it forces us to admit an uncomfortable truth. The natural world is not fully predictable. Even today, the limits of explanation. Science thrives on patterns, repetition, testable conditions, but rare events challenge that system. The vulture theory fits most of the facts, but not all of them. The meteorological accounts account for movement, but not origin. Religious interpretations offer meaning, but not mechanism. Each explanation solves part of the puzzle and leaves another piece untouched. And that is often how real history works. Not clean, not complete, not comforting. Why we keep coming back to this story? People are not drawn to the Kentucky meat shower because it's gross. They are drawn to it because it breaks expectation. We trust the sky. We trust gravity. We trust cause and effect. That trust cracked for a moment in 1876, and once cracked, it never fully sealed. A mirror held up to humanity. The reactions to the meat shower reveal more about us than about the event itself. Some people tasted the meat. Some ran away. Some prayed. Some analyzed. Some laughed. Different minds reached for different tools to cope with the same shock. That pattern has not changed from Kentucky to the world. Today, the story travels farther than the meat ever did. It appears in classrooms, documentaries, podcasts, and conversations late at night when people trade strange but true stories. It reminds us that history is not just wars and dates. It is moments when reality slips, the honest ending. There is no dramatic reveal waiting at the end of this story. No secret document, no hidden confession, no final answer. Just a field in Kentucky where meat once fell from the sky, and a world that had to accept it without fully understanding it. That may be the most truthful ending possible. One last thought. If you had been there, standing under that clear blue sky, what would you have believed? Science? Faith? Coincidence? Or would you have simply stared upward, waiting for it to stop? If this story made you pause, think, or question what you thought was possible, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video, comment with your theory, share it with someone who loves strange but true history, and subscribe to the channel for more real stories that sound impossible but actually happened. Because sometimes history is stranger than fiction.